Welcome, Intro to Sociology students. Nice to see you again, and I hope you're having a good week. Dr. Smith-Capros. This week, we're going to have another mini lecture, and I would just like to talk to you for a little bit about a subject that is really important in this class because it's going to be covered, it's going to come up again and again in every chapter in your book, and that is the big three sociological approaches or theoretical approaches. The big three is my name for them, but you will hear these approaches discussed at length in your book. John Mashionis, the author of your textbook, talks about the big three theories in each and every chapter of his book. So you're going to have a lot of information on them, and this lecture is just meant to clarify some concepts and hopefully to give you some examples of what these different approaches mean and how sociologists use them, which is most important because for this part of the term, you're all sociologists, and in your papers, in your exams, you're going to use at least one and probably more of these approaches. There are a lot of frameworks or theoretical approaches that sociologists use to study society. There are not just three, so let me be really clear about that. That's why we call these the big three, not the only three. There are many sociologists in the world, and it won't surprise you to find out that they disagree, oftentimes a lot, on how to actually analyze society. This isn't surprising. I bet you disagree with a lot of your friends or family about how to analyze or think about different events in society. So it makes sense that sociologists would also have a lot of different opinions and ways of looking at society. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the kind of most important ways that they have. These approaches are so important because what they do is they allow sociologists to organize, to categorize, and, if they're very, very brave, to attempt to explain society. That's the key. So today we're going to discuss the big three, how they've been so influential to the discipline of sociology so far. And I say so far because there could be new theoretical approaches tomorrow, which is what makes sociology so exciting. The big three, though, that we're going to discuss today are the structural functional approach, the social conflict approach, and the symbolic interaction approach. So we'll go through these one at a time. Some sociologists rely on just one out of the three to analyze and try to explain society. Others might use two of the three theories. Some might even combine elements of all three. And there are some sociologists, a lot of them as a matter of fact, that use theoretical approaches that aren't even included in the big three. So it's nice to know that there's a wide range of ways to look at society. And remember, sociologists often do not agree on things. The first approach that we're going to discuss today is called structural functionalism. And this is what we call a macro-level approach. And you probably know that macro means big. So a macro-level approach is one that looks at society and tries to analyze it from kind of an academic distance. And it tries to look at the big picture of society, not just details about society. Sociologists who ascribe to the structural functional viewpoint tend to see society as a nice, orderly system where the pieces should fit together in an interlocking style, and all these pieces need to fit together in this view in order for everything to run properly. So order is kind of the natural and desired state. When the pieces in society, when the pieces in the structure don't fit together properly, and that can be for various reasons. They might be broken, they might be defective or dysfunctional. The whole system can be damaged. The analogy or the kind of comparison that structural functionalists use, it's a very famous one and it's discussed in your book, is that of society almost like the human body. If you think about your own body, it's amazingly complex. There are all these different systems that have to run together, all these things that have to happen so that your body stays in nice working order. And if one part of your body's system breaks down, it can actually throw a lot of the body into chaos, and you can have problems. If an important enough system breaks down or doesn't work, the whole body can actually shut down. So structural functionalists see that as what can happen to society as well with dysfunction or disorder. But not everybody likes structural functionalism. As I said, there are a lot of critics in sociology who criticize this approach. And what the critics note is that society itself really seems to rarely be orderly, and that the emphasis on structure and function that structural functionalist theorists have masks and doesn't give credit to the role that some other realities play in society, like classism or racism or heterosexism. And the critics claim that structural functionalism doesn't take these things to account, doesn't give them enough kind of credit, even if it's negative credit, for the role that they play in events. So that's people who love structural functionalism and then people who don't. The next approach that we're going to look at is the social conflict approach. And that is exactly what it sounds like. Sociologists who work using the social conflict approach see our current lives and our societies as driven by a series of conflicts. And they see these as fueled by unequal power. This is also a macro-level approach, so it does have that in common with structural functionalism. The social conflict approach also looks at the big picture of society, not just the details. But that might be one of the few things that they actually have in common. This social conflict approach contends that poverty, patriarchy, racism, and a lot of other injustices like these continue across the globe because of inequality. Some social conflict theorists, like Marx, emphasize the role that economic power has in inequality, while some other social conflict theorists, like Weber, believe that there are kind of multiple arenas of power, many definitions of power. And then there are also feminist conflict theorists, and they concentrate on female inequality and the power of patriarchy, and they see that as at the heart of most societal issues and inequalities. Now, just like every other approach that we're going to discuss, there are critics of social conflict approach, and the critics note that there are a lot of times and places across societies where things are not in conflict. So they say sometimes stability and cooperation rather than conflict has and sometimes is a reality. They also feel that there's just too much of an emphasis on inequality, and they feel that there are examples that they can point to where societies are getting more equal rather than less. So that's social conflict. And finally, we're going to talk about symbolic interaction. Symbolic interaction is the third of our big three approaches, and there's something really different about it right away. It is not a macro approach. So the opposite of macro is micro. And that means it does look at the details or sort of the small pictures. Think microscope is a good way to remember it. So symbolic interactionists, these folks contend that it's kind of the day-to-day give and take between individuals, conversations that you and I might have, that actually makes society. And that's really a fascinating thought. Think of all the interchanges that you have day to day. Could all of those little interchanges added up together be the best way to analyze and to explain society? And there are a lot of different ways to go ahead and apply this approach. So I'm going to give you some examples so it's a little bit more clear. Some symbolic interactionists try to explain our social interactions and their importance by relationships and exchanges. These are called social exchange theorists, and it's a part of the symbolic interaction view. And they say that in these exchanges that we have all the time, every day in our lives, with our relationships, with friends, even with people that we don't know well, that people measure what to give in relation to what they get. And let me give you an example. Let's just say that you're in a relationship and you always treat your partner well. You go out of your way. You cook a nice meal for them. You remember their birthday with something very, very special. You call them up sometimes just to say hi and just to see how their day is. You're always there when they need you or they have a problem. But let's say that this partner never, ever exchanges similar niceties with you. They don't call you. They don't remember your birthday. They never cook for you. They're not reassuring. They're just not there for you. Let me ask, how long is this relationship going to last? Probably not very is the answer to that. And the social exchange theorists say that's because you very practically measured the exchange and you decided that you were putting too much into and not getting enough from the relationship. And so that caused you to make a big change. And this is the way that they explain how society ends up being and the way that they actually analyze it. But just like our other two approaches, you might guess that there are critics to this approach. And a lot of the criticism says that while certainly our day-to-day interactions with other people are incredibly important to our lives, they don't give us all the information we need to analyze society. Their criticism is that symbolic interactionism doesn't look at or focus on the big picture view, and in doing so, it can't analyze the full scope of societal changes. So, you have heard all three of our big three theories now, and as you can see, they're very, very different from each other. Just like many sociologists, after hearing about them, after reading about them, after looking at the PowerPoints, you may have a favorite among the big three when you learn about them. You may feel like one of these three approaches pretty much explains society to you, or at least allows you to analyze society. Or you may be a little dissatisfied by all of them and think that none of them completely does. Either way, I'm going to ask you to try each of them out, test drive them, if you will, on a big societal issue. For example, maybe violence, although you can pick your own issue. What might each approach say about why violence, for example, is so very widespread in our society? And when you do that with each one of the big three approaches, see what answers they might come up with for violence in society and see which one seems like the best answer to you. And maybe this is really important to you too. Can the approaches inform us about possible solutions to the challenge of violence? Could this be changes in public policy and education, changes in the family, changes in community, changes in society itself? And if none of the approaches is satisfactory in explaining or addressing that issue or some other issue, is there another way of sociological thinking that might be better, that might help us better analyze society? Use your sociological imagination to consider the question, because after all, sociology is always ripe for new ideas. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Take care.